I'm Claire. I'm 48 years old. And this is the story of how I discovered my husband was hiding money before our divorce, and how, just 2 weeks later, he lost everything he tried so hard to protect. Every single thing. But before I tell you exactly what happened, before I take you through every painful, humiliating, rage-filled moment of this nightmare, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know that someone out there understands what it feels like to be gutted by the person who promised to love you forever. Because this story, this whole ugly, devastating mess, it's not just about betrayal. It's so much more than that. It's about finally realizing, after 23 years of marriage, that the person you built an entire life with, the person you trusted with everything you had, with every dream and fear and vulnerable piece of yourself, was actively preparing to destroy you behind your back, while you were making his coffee in the morning, while you were doing his laundry, while you were lying next to him at night, feeling safe, feeling loved, feeling like you were part of something solid and real. He was planning your destruction like it was just another item on his to-do list. And the worst part? The absolute worst part is that I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to believe it. Maybe I saw every single sign and chose to look away because the truth was too terrible to face. Because admitting what was happening would mean admitting that my entire adult life had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath my feet. I'm exhausted. I need you to understand that first. I'm so bone-deep, soul-crushingly exhausted that some mornings I don't even recognize myself in the mirror. There's this woman staring back at me with hollow eyes and tight lines around her mouth, and I think, who is that? Where did Claire go? The real Claire. The one who used to laugh easily and trust without hesitation and believe that people meant what they said. She's gone. He took her. He killed her slowly, methodically, while pretending to love her. The confusion is almost worse than the pain. Because even now, even after everything I know, there's still this stupid, pathetic part of me that wants to understand why. Why wasn't I enough? Why did he feel the need to not just leave, but to destroy? What did I do that was so terrible, so unforgivable, that I deserved this level of calculated cruelty? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, at that quiet moment before the storm hit, when I was still living in blissful ignorance, still believing that our marriage was just going through a rough patch, that we'd weather it like we'd weathered everything else over 2 decades together. It started small. It always does, doesn't it? These catastrophic life implosions don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning. They creep in on quiet feet, in tiny moments that seem insignificant at the time, but later, when you look back, you realize they were screaming warnings that you were too trusting, too naive, too stupidly hopeful to hear. I started noticing changes maybe 6 months before everything fell apart. Little things. Shifts in behavior so subtle that I questioned whether I was imagining them. He started taking phone calls late at night, walking out of whatever room I was in, his voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite hear. When I asked who it was, he'd say, it was work. Always work. Some client in a different time zone, some project that needed his immediate attention. And I believed him because why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason not to trust him. 23 years of marriage. And he'd never once made me doubt his word. God, I was such a fool. Then there were the bank notifications. We had a joint account. Had always had one. Because that's what married people do, right? They share their finances because they're building a life together. Because there are no secrets. Because what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. But I started seeing notifications for transactions I didn't recognize. Small amounts, mostly. A few hundred here. A few hundred there. Not enough to raise immediate alarm, but enough to make me pause, to make me wonder. I checked the statements once or twice, but the descriptions were vague. Transfer, they'd say. Withdrawal. Nothing that pointed to anything specific or suspicious. And when I tried to dig deeper, to ask him about it, he'd wave it off so casually that I felt ridiculous for even asking. Just moving some money around, he'd say. Nothing to worry about. And I'd nod and smile and go back to whatever I was doing, pushing down that little voice in my head that whispered something wasn't right. His whole tone changed too. It was so gradual that I didn't notice it happening until it had already happened, if that makes sense. The warmth between us just evaporated. He stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me in that casual, affectionate way that long-married couples do. No more hand on my shoulder as he passed behind my chair. No more quick kiss on the forehead when he left for work. No more inside jokes or shared glances across the dinner table. We became roommates, polite strangers sharing a space, going through the motions of a marriage that had died somewhere along the way without either of us officially acknowledging its death. I told myself it was stress. He'd been working long hours, dealing with difficult clients. I was busy too, managing the house, taking care of my aging mother, trying to keep up with my part-time consulting work. We were just in a rut, I thought. All marriages go through them. We'd come out the other side like we always did. Except we didn't. We couldn't, because he was already halfway out the door, already building a new life that didn't include me, already plotting and planning and strategizing how to walk away with everything while leaving me with nothing. The moment everything shifted, the moment I couldn't ignore the truth anymore, came on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was bringing in the mail, sorting through the usual bills and advertisements and credit card offers, when I saw an envelope addressed to him. It was from a financial institution I'd never heard of before. Not our regular bank. Not any bank I recognized. The return address was from someplace downtown, one of those sleek investment firms with names that sound expensive and exclusive. My hands were shaking as I held it. I don't know why. Some instinct, maybe. Some primal understanding that whatever was inside that envelope was going to change everything. I stood there in our foyer, surrounded by the life we'd built together, the family photos on the walls, the furniture we'd chosen as newlyweds, the paint colors I'd agonized over, and I knew. I just knew. I didn't open it. I'm not proud of that, but I didn't. I put it on his desk like I always did with his mail, and I went upstairs and I cried in the bathroom with the shower running so he wouldn't hear me when he got home. Because even then, even knowing something was deeply fundamentally wrong, I was still protecting him, still trying to keep up appearances, still playing the role of the good wife who doesn't snoop, who doesn't question, who trusts blindly even when that trust is being used as a weapon against her. You know that gut feeling you try to ignore? That tiny voice whispering that something isn't right? I silenced mine for months, maybe longer. I pushed it down every time it tried to surface. Told myself I was being paranoid, being dramatic, being one of those suspicious wives who destroys a perfectly good marriage with her own insecurity and jealousy. Until I couldn't anymore. Until the voice got so loud, so insistent, that ignoring it would have required a level of delusion I just couldn't maintain. The night everything became crystal clear was a Thursday. I remember because I'd made his favorite dinner, pot roast with roasted vegetables, trying to recreate some sense of normalcy, trying to bring back some of that warmth that had disappeared from our relationship. He barely touched it, said he wasn't hungry, pushed the food around his plate while scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by that cold blue light, his expression completely closed off to me. After dinner, I went to bed early. I was exhausted from pretending everything was fine, from smiling when I wanted to scream, from acting like I didn't notice the massive, gaping distance between us. I must have fallen asleep around 9, and I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of his voice drifting from downstairs. At first, I thought he was on a work call again, but there was something different about his tone. It was soft, intimate almost, the way he used to talk to me, years ago, before everything went cold. I lay there in the dark, straining to hear, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He was whispering, deliberately keeping his voice low, but in the silence of the house at night, sound carries in strange ways. I caught fragments of sentences, not enough to understand the full conversation, but enough to understand that this wasn't about work. This was personal. This was private. This was something he very much did not want me to hear. I got out of bed as quietly as I could. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like thunder to my ears. I crept to the top of the stairs, pressing myself against the wall in the shadows, barely breathing, just listening to my husband's voice float up from his office, warm and animated in a way he hadn't been with me in months. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he said. Clear as day, calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather or what he'd had for lunch. My blood turned to ice. She doesn't suspect. I was the she. I knew it with absolute certainty. There was no other woman he'd be talking about. In that context, in that tone, at that hour of the night, he was talking about me. To someone. About me not suspecting something. Something he was doing, something he was hiding. I heard a name. Elia. He said it with such familiarity, such ease. "Don't worry, Elia," he said. "Everything is going according to plan. She has no idea." Who the hell was Elia? The name burned itself into my brain. I stood there at the top of the stairs, in my nightgown, in the house I'd called home for 15 years, and I felt reality tilt sideways. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed about my life, my marriage, my husband, it all shattered in that moment. I heard him moving, his chair scraping against the floor, his footsteps approaching the office door. Panic seized me. I ran back to the bedroom as quietly as I could, threw myself into bed, pulled the covers up, forced my breathing to slow, my body to relax, my face to smooth into the peaceful mask of sleep. He came in a few minutes later. I felt him pause in the doorway, felt his eyes on me. I kept my breathing steady, deep, even, praying he couldn't hear my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching me. Then he crossed the room, got into bed beside me, and within minutes, he was asleep, peaceful, content, without a care in the world. I lay there next to him until dawn, rigid with fear and fury, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe, resisting the urge to scream or cry or shake him awake and demand answers. "She doesn't suspect anything yet." The words played on repeat in my mind. Yet, meaning eventually, I would. Meaning there was something to suspect. Meaning my husband, the man I'd loved for over 2 decades, was actively deceiving me and congratulating himself on how well it was working. The next morning, I waited until he left for work. I made him breakfast like always, poured his coffee like always, kissed him goodbye at the door like always. And the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I ran to our home office and logged into our bank accounts. I went through everything, every transaction, every transfer, every withdrawal, and there it was, clear as day once I knew to look for it. Small, repeated withdrawals, $50 here, $200 there, $500, $300. The amounts varied, but they were regular, systematic, deliberate, and they'd been happening for months, almost a year. When I traced back far enough, I added it up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use the calculator 3 times to make sure I had the right number. Over $40,000. He'd quietly siphoned over $40,000 out of our joint account, in small enough increments that I wouldn't notice, but consistently enough that it added up to a devastating amount. I printed everything, every statement, every transaction. My printer whirred and clicked, spitting out page after page of evidence of his betrayal, and I stood there watching the papers pile up, feeling absolutely nothing. The anger would come later. The grief would come later. In that moment, I just felt hollow, empty, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything vital, leaving behind just a shell. When he came home that evening, I was cooking dinner. He walked in, set his briefcase down, loosened his tie. "Smells good," he said. Like everything was normal. Like he hadn't stolen thousands of dollars from our shared account. Like he wasn't plotting something with someone named Elia. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady and pleasant. "Fine," he said. "Busy. You know how it is." I did know. I knew exactly how it was. Hey, I said, keeping my tone casual, light, just curious. I noticed some withdrawals from our account. Nothing major, just regular amounts. What's that about? He didn't even hesitate, didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of guilt or concern. Oh, that, he said, waving his hand dismissively. Just some small investments. Nothing to worry about. I'm diversifying our portfolio, trying to make our money work harder for us. Our money, our portfolio, us. The lies came so easily to him, so smoothly, like he'd practiced them. That's great, I said, smiling. I'm glad you're thinking about our future. He smiled back, kissed me on the cheek, told me dinner smelled amazing. And I stood there at the stove, stirring pasta sauce, feeling a mixture of fear and denial that was absolutely suffocating. The kind of fear that feels like shame. Because part of me, some small, weak part, still wanted to believe him, still wanted to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was a reasonable explanation, that our marriage wasn't the complete sham I was beginning to realize it was. But I couldn't unknow what I knew, couldn't unhear what I'd heard. She doesn't suspect anything yet. The words haunted me, drove me slowly insane over the following days and weeks as I watched him, studied him, searched for more evidence of his deception while pretending everything was perfectly fine. And then, almost overnight, something shifted in him. He became affectionate again, attentive, sweet, even. It was so sudden, so jarring, after months of cold distance, that it immediately set off alarm bells. This wasn't reconciliation. This was strategy. He started asking questions. Casual questions, slipped into everyday conversations. Did I know where all our important documents were? Had I updated my passwords lately? Did I remember my login information for all our accounts? I'm just thinking, he said one evening. What if something happened to one of us? We should make sure we both have access to everything. You know, just in case. Just in case. Just in case of what, exactly? Just in case you need to lock me out of my own accounts? Just in case you need to take everything that's rightfully half mine? A suggested consolidating our assets. For emergencies, he said, it would be easier to manage everything if it was all in one place. Don't you think? We could set up a joint investment account, move everything there, simplify things. I nodded along, pretended to consider it, said it sounded like a good idea, we should definitely look into it. And he smiled. God, that smile. So satisfied, so confident. The smile of a man who thought he was winning, who thought his stupid, trusting wife was falling for every word he said. And I smiled back. The smile of a woman who was done losing, who was done being played, who was done being treated like she was too stupid or too blind or too devoted to see what was happening right in front of her face. Because here's what he didn't know. Here's what he never suspected, because he'd underestimated me so completely. I wasn't falling for anything. I was watching. I was documenting. I was planning. And while he thought he was so clever, so strategic, so far ahead of me, I was 10 steps ahead of him. I started my own investigation. Quietly, carefully. I waited until he was at work, and I went through his office with methodical precision. I checked his email on our shared computer. He deleted messages, but he wasn't as tech-savvy as he thought he was. Deleted emails go to a trash folder, and trash folders can be recovered. I found them. Dozens of emails to Elia. Not a mistress as I'd initially feared. No, this was somehow worse. Elia was a financial advisor, someone helping him move money, hide assets, prepare for a divorce he hadn't even mentioned to me yet. They discussed accounts I'd never heard of, offshore holdings, property transfers, ways to make our shared wealth look like his wealth, ways to leave me with nothing. The rage I felt reading those emails was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was white hot and all-consuming. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. I wanted to print out every single message and throw them in his face and watch him try to explain his way out of this betrayal. But I didn't. I took screenshots of everything. I forwarded key emails to an account he didn't know about. I saved everything to a flash drive that I hid in a place he'd never think to look. And then I deleted my browsing history, cleared the trash folder of the messages I'd restored, and went downstairs to start dinner like nothing had happened. I called my friend Rebecca. We'd gone to law school together, 25 years ago. She'd stuck with it, built a successful practice in family law. I'd dropped out after the first year, decided it wasn't for me, went into consulting instead. We'd stayed close though, had lunch every few months, shared updates about our lives. I need your advice, I told her when we met for coffee the next day. Hypothetically, she took one look at my face and said, "Nothing about this is hypothetical, is it?" I told her everything, showed her the emails, the bank statements, the evidence of systematic financial deception. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer with every detail. "Claire," she said when I finished, "he's not just thinking about divorce. He's staging a hostile takeover of your life, and he's doing it in a way that's designed to leave you legally vulnerable and financially devastated." "I know," I said. "What do I do?" She pulled out her phone. "First, you hire me, not as a friend, as your lawyer. This is going to get ugly, and you need someone who knows how to fight dirty. Second, you start moving your own money. Immediately. Any account that's solely in your name, you empty it. You set up a trust. You protect yourself before he can drain everything. Third, you document everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every lie. Because when this goes to court, and it will go to court, you need to bury him in evidence." "Is that legal?" I asked. "Can I just take money out of our accounts?" "If your name is on the account, it's your money just as much as his. You're not stealing. You're protecting yourself from theft. There's a difference." "But Claire, you need to move fast. If he files first, if he gets ahead of this, he can freeze everything. And then you're fighting from a position of weakness instead of strength." So that's what I did. I went home, and I started moving money. It wasn't as much as he'd moved, because I didn't have access to the hidden accounts, but I had my inheritance from my father, about $60,000 that he'd left me when he died 5 years ago. It had been sitting in an account in my name only, earning minimal interest, meant to be our retirement cushion. I transferred every penny into a private trust that Rebecca helped me set up, an account my husband didn't know about, couldn't access, couldn't touch. I pulled out some cash from our joint account, not enough to raise immediate red flags, but enough to sustain me when everything inevitably hit the fan. And at night, I lay beside him in bed. He'd fall asleep quickly, peacefully, like he didn't have a care in the world. And I'd watch him in the darkness, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and I'd think about all the years I'd wasted, all the trust I'd given so freely, all the love I'd poured into a man who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome, an asset to liquidate. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, not anymore. I just moved, quietly, deliberately. While he slept peacefully beside me, I was systematically protecting myself from the destruction he was planning. And there was something almost peaceful about it. Something empowering about taking back control of my own life, my own future, even if he didn't know it yet. The confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure came on a Saturday morning. He asked me to come into his office, said he had some paperwork to go over with me. Important stuff that needed my signature. My heart was racing as I walked in, but I kept my face calm, curious, trusting, the good wife, ready to sign whatever her husband put in front of her. He handed me a file. "Just some tax paperwork," he said. "Needs to be filed by the end of the month. Nothing major." I opened it. It wasn't tax paperwork. It was a property transfer document. Our condo in the city. The one we'd bought as an investment property 10 years ago. The one that was worth at least $400,000 now. He wanted me to sign it over. To him. Solely to him. What is this? I asked, keeping my voice level. Oh, yeah, he said so casually. I'm restructuring some of our assets for tax purposes. It's better if the condo is in one name instead of both. Trust me, it'll save us a lot of money in the long run. Trust him. Trust the man who'd been systematically stealing from me for months. Trust the man who'd been planning to divorce me while pretending everything was fine. Trust the man who thought I was stupid enough to sign away a property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because he said it was for tax purposes. I looked down at the document, at the line where my signature should go. I could feel him watching me, waiting, expecting me to just pick up the pen and sign like I always did. Like the obedient wife who never questioned, never pushed back, never stood up for herself. I need to read through this first, I said, closing the folder. His smile faltered. Just for a second. It's pretty standard stuff. You don't need to. I'll read through it, I said, more firmly this time. I never sign anything without reading it first. You know that. I didn't know that. I'd signed plenty of things over the years without reading them, trusting him to handle our finances, to manage our investments, to make decisions that benefited us both. But he didn't know that I'd changed, that I was no longer the woman who trusted blindly. Sure, he said, recovering. Of course. Take your time. No rush. I took the folder upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at this document that was so clearly designed to strip me of my assets, to leave me with nothing when he finally pulled the trigger on the divorce he was planning. I texted Rebecca. She called me immediately. Don't sign anything, she said. Not a single thing. And Claire, it's time. You need to file first. Before he does, you have all the evidence you need. We have the documentation of his hidden accounts, his asset transfers, his deception. If you wait for him to file, you lose the advantage. I'm not ready, I whispered. You are, she said. You're more ready than you think. And Claire, he's not going to wait much longer. Men like this, once they put all their pieces in place, they strike. And when they do, they strike hard. You need to beat him to it. She was right. I knew she was right. But actually pulling that trigger, actually ending my marriage, actually admitting that the last 23 years had led to this moment of complete betrayal, it felt impossible. It felt like failure, like giving up. It's not giving up, Rebecca said, reading my mind. It's surviving. There's a difference. I told him I'd think about signing the property transfer, that I wanted to understand the tax implications first. Maybe consult with an accountant. He didn't like it. I could tell, but he couldn't push too hard without revealing his hand, so he smiled and said, of course, whatever made me comfortable. That week, Rebecca filed for divorce on my behalf. She did it quietly, without warning, striking first like she'd advised. And she didn't just file for divorce. She filed with a full accounting of his hidden assets, his offshore accounts, his systematic financial abuse. She requested a freeze on all accounts pending the divorce proceedings. She laid out every detail of his deception in legal language that was devastating in its precision. He was served the papers at his office. I wasn't there to see his face, but I imagine the shock was spectacular. Because I'd beaten him. I'd done exactly what he'd been planning to do to me, but I'd done it first. And I'd done it with evidence he didn't know I had. He came home that night in a rage. A cold, controlled rage that was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. He walked in, threw the papers on the kitchen counter, and looked at me like he'd never seen me before. What the hell is this? He asked. I think it's pretty clear what it is, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. I'm divorcing you. On what grounds? Based on what lies did that bitch lawyer convince you to? Based on the truth, I interrupted. Based on the $40,000 you stole from our joint account. Based on the offshore accounts you've been hiding. Based on Elia and your little plan to leave me with nothing. Based on the fact that you tried to get me to sign over our condo to you under the guise of tax paperwork. Should I go on? The color drained from his face. You went through my private emails. You invaded my privacy. That's illegal. I'll have your case thrown out for... It's not illegal to check emails on a shared computer. Rebecca had coached me on this. It's not illegal to review bank statements for accounts with my name on them. And it's not illegal to protect myself from financial abuse. But you know what is illegal? Hiding assets in a divorce, which you haven't filed for yet, but you were planning to. I just saved the court some time. He stared at me like I was a stranger, like I'd transformed into someone he didn't recognize. And I suppose I had. The old Claire, the trusting one, the naive one, she was gone. He'd killed her. And this new version, the one standing in front of him, refusing to be a victim, she terrified him. I could see it in his eyes. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. I will bury you. I will drag you through so much legal hell that you'll wish you'd just taken whatever I was willing to give you and walked away quietly. Get out of my house, I said. It's my house too. Then I'll leave. I grabbed my purse, my phone, my keys. I'd already packed a bag, hidden it in my car that morning, anticipating this exact scenario. My lawyer will be in touch about the proceedings. Don't contact me directly. All communication goes through Rebecca. I walked out, got in my car, drove to the hotel where I'd booked a room. And once I was safely inside, door locked, alone for the first time in this new reality, I broke down. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe. 23 years, gone. Not because love faded, not because we grew apart naturally, but because he'd chosen to betray me so fundamentally, so completely, that there was no coming back from it. The next few weeks were hell. He did exactly what he'd threatened. He filed a countersuit claiming I'd drained our finances. He told everyone who would listen that I was the one hiding money, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd destroyed our marriage with my paranoia and accusations. He spread lies to our friends, to our neighbors, to people we'd known for years. And some of them believed him. That was the part that hurt almost as much as his betrayal. People I'd considered friends took his side without even asking for my version of events. They saw a successful, charming man being attacked by his bitter, vindictive wife, and they chose him. I had to endure whispers at the grocery store, pitying looks from people I'd known for years, friends who stopped calling, invitations that dried up. My life became about legal meetings and depositions and court dates, about sitting across from him in conference rooms while lawyers argued about who was entitled to what, about watching him lie under oath with such conviction that I almost admired the performance. But I endured it. I showed up to every meeting, calm and composed. I answered every question truthfully. I presented every piece of evidence methodically, and I let Rebecca do her job, which she did brilliantly. He demanded an audit of my accounts, claimed I was hiding assets just like he'd been doing. His lawyer painted me as manipulative, deceitful, a woman who'd been planning this divorce for years and systematically stealing from the marriage. The day of that particular hearing, I watched him sit at the defendant's table looking so righteous, so wronged. His lawyer presented their case with dramatic flair, suggesting I'd moved money, hidden assets, deceived my loving husband who'd been blindsided by my sudden filing for divorce. Then Rebecca stood up. She pulled out documentation showing every move I'd made. Every transaction was dated, time-stamped, and most importantly occurred before he'd filed his countersuit, before he'd been served divorce papers. She showed that the only money I'd moved was my own inheritance, which I was legally entitled to protect. She showed that every penny I'd taken from our joint account was withdrawn after discovering his theft, and was less than half of what he'd stolen. She presented his emails with Elia, the plans they'd made, the timeline of his deception, the offshore accounts he'd failed to disclose, the property transfer document he'd tried to trick me into signing. The judge listened to all of it, reviewed the evidence, and then looked at my husband with barely concealed disgust. "Your motion is denied," she said. "And furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay your wife's legal fees for this hearing. as her financial disclosure has been complete and honest, while yours has been neither. We'll address the full accounting of marital assets at the next hearing." I watched his face as the judgment was handed down. The smirk he'd been wearing, that confident, condescending smile that said he knew he'd win because he always won, it faded. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he looked uncertain, afraid, even, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just exhaustion and a grim determination to see this through to the end. He didn't stop, though. Men like him never do. They can't accept losing, especially not to the women they've underestimated. So he escalated. He got desperate. He teamed up with Elia, that financial advisor who'd helped him hide assets, and they concocted a new strategy. They fabricated documents claiming I'd opened fraudulent accounts in his name, that I'd been the one moving money offshore, using his information, setting him up to take the fall for my financial crimes. It was elaborate, almost impressive in its audacity. They created bank statements, transfer records, email chains that supposedly showed me planning this fraud months before I'd filed for divorce. They presented it all to the court with straight faces, swearing under oath that everything was accurate and true. Rebecca tore it apart in less than an hour. Because they'd made a critical mistake. The accounts they claimed I'd opened, they showed opening dates from 8 months ago. But the offshore bank they'd supposedly been opened with had only started operating in that region 6 months ago. The timestamps on the emails didn't match the metadata. The IP addresses traced back to his office, not our home. The whole thing fell apart under the barest scrutiny. I sat in that courtroom watching my husband and his accomplice commit perjury, watching them destroy what was left of his credibility, and I felt something break inside me. The last tiny piece of me that had still loved him, that had still hoped there was some explanation, some justification for his actions. It died right there. Rebecca didn't just defend against their accusations. She went on the offense. She filed a countersuit for defamation, for falsified evidence, for perjury. She presented everything to the court in a package so airtight, so damning, that his own lawyer looked like he wanted to quit, and the judge threw the book at him. She dismissed his entire case, awarded me the majority of our marital assets as compensation for his deception and fraud, ordered him to pay my legal fees in full, and she referred the matter of his falsified documents to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. He lost everything, not just the marriage, not just the money, but his reputation, his business relationships, his standing in the community. Word spread fast about what he'd tried to do, about the lies he'd told, about the evidence he'd fabricated. Clients left him. Professional contacts distanced themselves. The life he'd been so carefully constructing, the one that didn't include me, it imploded spectacularly. And me? I walked out of that courthouse a free woman, financially secure, legally vindicated, but emotionally destroyed in ways I'm still trying to understand. The quiet after the storm was almost worse than the chaos. I'd spent months in constant fight-or-flight mode. Every day was about survival, about the next hearing, the next legal filing, the next battle. And then suddenly it was over. The divorce was finalized. The papers were signed. He was out of my life for good. I moved into a new apartment. Not the condo he'd tried to steal from me. I sold that. Couldn't bear to live in a place that reminded me of him. I found a smaller place across town, near my sister. Started fresh with new furniture, new routines, new everything. Peace felt unfamiliar. I'd wake up in the morning and for a split second, I'd forget. Forget that everything had changed. Forget that I was alone now. Forget that my old life was gone. And then reality would crash back in, and I'd have to remember all over again. Rebecca came over to help me unpack. We drank wine on my new balcony, watching the sunset over the city, and she raised her glass. "He underestimated you," she said. I smiled. It felt strange on my face, like I'd forgotten how most men do. I blocked his number, his email, all his social media. I didn't want to know how he was doing, what he was saying, whether he was suffering or thriving or somewhere in between. He was a chapter of my life that I'd closed, and I had no intention of ever reopening it. My sister threw me a small dinner party a few weeks later. Just her, my daughter from my first marriage who'd been my rock through all of this, and a few close friends who'd stood by me when others had turned away. We ate good food and drank expensive wine and laughed in a way I hadn't laughed in over a year. My daughter raised her glass. "To Mom," she said, "for being the strongest person I know, for showing me what it looks like to stand up for yourself even when it's terrifying, for never giving up, to freedom," I added, "and to never letting anyone think they can outsmart you again." We clinked glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by people who actually loved me, who actually valued me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Hope, just a small flicker of it, but it was there. At 48, I didn't expect to start over. I'd thought my life was set, my path determined. I thought I'd grow old with him, retire together, maybe travel, enjoy grandchildren someday. I thought I knew how my story would go. But maybe that's the point. Maybe sometimes the end is what saves you. Maybe sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing, disguised as a catastrophe. Because that marriage, that life, it was killing me slowly. I was so busy playing the role of the good wife that I'd forgotten who I was underneath it all. Now I'm remembering. Slowly, painfully, but I'm remembering. I'm taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I'm traveling. Just small trips for now, weekend getaways to places I've always wanted to see. I'm reconnecting with old friends, making new ones, building a life that's mine alone. Is it easy? No. Some days I wake up and the loneliness is crushing. Some days I see couples my age still together, still in love, and I feel like a failure. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have tried harder, forgiven more, been more patient. But then I remember his voice on the phone saying, "She doesn't suspect anything." I remember the hidden accounts, the lies, the property transfer document, the fabricated fraud claims. I remember all of it, and I know I didn't just do the right thing. I did the only thing. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, I want you to remember this. You can rebuild from anything. It doesn't feel like it at the time. When your world is crashing down around you, when the person who was supposed to love you is actively trying to destroy you, it feels like the end of everything. Like you'll never be whole again. But you will. Not the same person you were before. You can't go back to innocence once it's been shattered. But you can become someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows her own worth and refuses to settle for less than she deserves. Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. I didn't need to scream or rage or make a scene. I didn't need to stoop to his level or fight dirty or sacrifice my integrity. I just needed to be smart, to document everything, to move strategically, to trust the legal system and my lawyer and most importantly myself. And when it was all over, when he'd lost everything he tried to steal, I didn't gloat. I didn't call him to rub it in. I didn't post about it on social media or tell everyone who would listen how I'd won. I just walked away, quietly, with my head high and my finances secure and my future bright with possibility. Because that's real strength. Not the loud, aggressive kind, but the quiet, determined kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience or applause. The kind that just moves forward, one step at a time, rebuilding from the rubble of what was destroyed. I'm Claire. I'm 48 years old. And this was the story of how I lost my marriage but found myself, how I discovered that betrayal, as devastating as it is, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something better, if you're brave enough to let it. So drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home for you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've been through something similar, if you've survived your own betrayal, if you've had to rebuild from nothing, because we're not alone in this. As isolated as it feels, as uniquely painful as every individual story is, we're not alone. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and remember what I learned the hard way. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it just puts one foot in front of the other and keeps going when giving up would be easier. Sometimes it just walks away, quietly, from everything that's hurting you and toward everything that's waiting for you on the other side. And that other side, it's worth fighting for. I promise you that. It's worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and fear and overwhelming grief, because on the other side of betrayal is freedom. And freedom, once you've tasted it, once you've really understood what it means to live life on your own terms without someone undermining you at every turn, is the sweetest thing there is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me share this story that still hurts to tell but needs to be told. Because maybe somewhere out there someone is going through what I went through. Someone is lying awake at night, wondering if they're crazy, if they're imagining things, if they should just ignore that gut feeling telling them something is wrong. And if that's you, I want you to hear this. You're not crazy. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Protect yourself. And know that you're stronger than you think. Strong enough to survive this. Strong enough to rebuild. Strong enough to come out the other side better than you were before. I did it. And if I can, you can too.